The meeting invite came through at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line: Performance discussion, mandatory attendance. Organizer: Brandon Mitchell. Attendees: me, Brandon, and the entire HR department. 5 people from HR for a performance discussion. That's not normal. Brandon Mitchell was our new director of sales operations. He'd been with the company for exactly 6 weeks. I've been here for 8 years. I was a senior sales strategist with an expertise in enterprise accounts that took years to build and relationships that generated millions in recurring revenue. Brandon was 28, fresh from an MBA program, hired to modernize our sales operations according to the LinkedIn announcement. He'd spent his first 6 weeks implementing changes that mostly involved adding more reporting requirements and questioning everything the sales team had been doing successfully for years. We hadn't gotten along. That was an understatement. But I hadn't expected this. I walked into the conference room at 4 p.m. Brandon was already there, sitting at the head of the table with a folder in front of him. The entire HR team was arranged along one side, 5 people looking uncomfortable. Jennifer Park, the HR director, was at the far end looking particularly uneasy. No one from my management chain was present. My direct manager, Tom Chen, who I'd worked with for 5 years. The VP of Sales, Maria Santos. Nobody except Brandon and HR. Samantha, have a seat, Brandon said, gesturing to the chair directly across from him. I sat down, setting my notebook on the table. What's this about? This is a performance discussion regarding your continued employment at this company. The room went very quiet. Even the HR team looked surprised, which told me they hadn't been fully briefed on what Brandon was planning. My continued employment, I repeated. Based on what performance issues? Brandon opened his folder. Over the past 6 weeks, I've documented multiple instances of insubordination, resistance to process improvements, and failure to meet reporting requirements. Your attitude has been obstructive and unprofessional. Insubordination? I've questioned some of your process changes because they don't align with how enterprise sales actually works. That's not insubordination. That's professional disagreement. When a director implements new procedures, your job is to follow them, not to question them. My job is to manage enterprise accounts and close deals. When new procedures interfere with that, I'm going to raise concerns. That's literally what senior strategists do. Your resistance to change is exactly the problem, Brandon said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. This company hired me to modernize operations, and I can't do that with team members who refuse to adapt. Jennifer Park cleared her throat. Brandon, perhaps we should discuss. I've made my decision, Brandon interrupted. Samantha, your employment is being terminated effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance and your benefits will continue through the end of the month. I stared at him. This kid who'd been here 6 weeks was firing me in front of the entire HR department. Without my manager present. Without anyone from sales leadership present. Just him, HR as witnesses, and apparently the assumption that he had the authority to do this. Brandon, I said calmly, have you reviewed my employment contract? He blinked. Your contract? You're an at-will employee. I don't need to review anything. Actually, I'm not an at-will employee. I have a specific employment contract that's quite different from standard at-will arrangements. Did you review it before scheduling this meeting? Brandon looked at Jennifer. Is that true? Jennifer's face had gone carefully neutral. Samantha, could you give us a moment? No, I said. Brandon scheduled this meeting to terminate me in front of the entire HR team. Whatever happens next happens in front of the same audience. Samantha, I think it would be better. Jennifer, with respect, I don't care what would be better for HR right now. Brandon just tried to fire me without authority and without reviewing basic employment documents. We're going to address that here now with everyone who was invited to witness my humiliation. Brandon's face was getting red. I have full authority over my department. Actually, you don't. Not over me. I pulled out my phone and opened my document files. My contract, which was negotiated when I was promoted to senior strategist 4 years ago, specifies several things. First, I can only be terminated by the VP of Sales or above. A director of sales operations doesn't have that authority. Jennifer was pulling up something on her laptop, her expression increasingly concerned. Second, I continued. Any performance concerns must go through a formal review process that includes my direct manager and the VP of sales. That hasn't happened. Third, my contract includes a 12-month severance package, not 2 weeks. And fourth, any attempt to terminate me in violation of these terms triggers liquidated damages of $250,000 plus attorney's fees. The room was completely silent now. Brandon was staring at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. That's impossible. Nobody has a contract like that. I do. Because 4 years ago, I brought in the Castellan Industries account, which generates $14 annually. When the company wanted to promote me and ensure I didn't get poached by competitors, they offered me a senior strategist position with contract protections. Standard practice for revenue-critical employees. Jennifer had found what she was looking for on her laptop. Her expression confirmed everything I was saying. Brandon, we need to stop this meeting immediately. Why? If she has some special contract, that doesn't change that her performance has been. Brandon, Jennifer said, her voice sharp now. You do not have authority to terminate Samantha's employment. That authority rests solely with Maria Santos or the CEO. You also haven't followed the required performance review process outlined in her contract. This meeting should not have been scheduled. I'm a director. I manage sales operations. That includes personnel decisions for people in my department. Samantha isn't in your department, Jennifer said. She reports to Tom Chen, who reports to Maria Santos. You're in operations. She's in sales strategy. You have no direct authority over her position. I watched Brandon's face as this sank in. He'd scheduled a termination meeting for someone he didn't manage, without reviewing her employment contract, without involving her actual management chain, and in front of the entire HR department who were now witnesses to his spectacular mistake. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something about this moment. This wasn't just about a bad manager overstepping his authority. This was about knowing your value, documenting your contributions, and negotiating protections when you have leverage. And it was about what happens when someone assumes they have power they don't actually have. If you've ever been threatened with termination by someone who didn't have authority, if you've ever been told you're replaceable when you know you're not, if you've ever negotiated protections that saved you later, stay with me. Because what Brandon didn't know was that my contract wasn't just paperwork. It was insurance. And he'd just triggered every protection it contained. My name is Samantha Reeves, and I'd been a senior sales strategist at Titanium Solutions for 8 years. We're an enterprise software company, about 400 employees, providing custom business intelligence platforms for Fortune 500 companies. I'd started as a junior account executive, worked my way up through discipline and results. In year 4, I'd landed the Castellan Industries account, a major manufacturing company that needed a complete buy overhaul. That deal was worth $14 initially, but over the following years it had grown to include subsidiaries and international divisions. Current annual recurring revenue, $22 million. That single account was roughly 8% of our company's total revenue. When I'd closed that deal and it became clear Castellan was going to be a long-term strategic partnership, our VP of sales at the time, Robert Morrison, had pulled me aside. Samantha, we need to make sure you're planning to stay here long-term. Other companies are going to notice what you did with Castellan and come calling with offers. I'm happy here, I'd said. Good. But I want to make sure you stay happy. Let's talk about a promotion and a contract that reflects your value to this company. That conversation had led to a negotiation. Senior strategist position. Significant salary increase. But more importantly, contract protections that were unusual for anyone below C-level. The key terms: termination only by VP of Sales or CEO, formal performance review process, required before any termination, 12 months, severance $250,000, liquidated damages for wrongful termination, attorney fees, covered if I had to enforce the contract. I'd negotiated those terms because I understood leverage. Castellan had signed primarily because of my relationship with their CFO and CTO. If I left, there was a real risk they'd reconsider the partnership. The company couldn't afford to lose me carelessly. 4 years later, those contract terms were about to prove their value. Brandon Mitchell had been hired 6 weeks ago to modernize sales operations. What that meant in practice was that he'd implemented a bunch of new reporting requirements that added administrative work without adding value. Daily activity logs, detailed pipeline updates, mandatory weekly forecast meetings. For some sales roles, that kind of structure makes sense. For enterprise strategists managing complex, long-term accounts, it's busy work that distracts from actual relationship management and deal progression. I'd raise concerns in team meetings, politely, professionally, with specific examples of how the new requirements were impacting client work. Brandon had responded by suggesting I was resistant to accountability and unwilling to adapt to modern sales practices. We'd clashed multiple times, but I'd never imagined he'd try to fire me. Back in the conference room, Jennifer was trying to manage the situation. Brandon, this meeting is over. Samantha, I apologize for this. This shouldn't have happened. You're right, it shouldn't have, I said. But it did happen. Brandon scheduled a termination meeting without authority, without reviewing my contract, without involving my management chain, and in front of your entire team. That's not just a procedural error. That's a hostile employment action. Brandon found his voice again. Hostile? I was trying to address a performance problem. No, you were trying to retaliate against someone who questioned your authority. There's a difference. That's not true, Brandon. You've been here 6 weeks. I've been here 8 years. In that time, I've brought in and managed accounts representing over $40 in annual recurring revenue. My performance reviews have been consistently excellent. I've never received any formal discipline or warnings. And you decided to fire me because I raised professional concerns about your processes. That's textbook retaliation. Jennifer intervened again. Samantha, I think we should schedule a separate meeting to discuss. No. We're addressing this now. Because if I leave this room without resolution, I'm calling my attorney and we're discussing wrongful termination and hostile work environment claims. Your choice, Jennifer. We handle this now with everyone present, or we handle it through lawyers. She looked pained but nodded. What do you want? First, I want acknowledgement from Brandon that he does not have authority to terminate my employment. Second, I want documentation that this meeting was conducted in violation of my contract terms. Third, I want my management chain involved in whatever happens next. Tom Chen and Maria Santos should be in this conversation. Maria is in New York at a conference, Jennifer said. Then we conference her in. This doesn't proceed without my actual managers present. Jennifer pulled out her phone and called Maria Santos. Put her on speaker. Maria, it's Jennifer. I'm in a conference room with Brandon Mitchell and Samantha Reeves. There's been a situation that requires your immediate attention. What kind of situation? Brandon scheduled a meeting to terminate Samantha's employment. He didn't review her contract or involve her management chain. Samantha's contract requires that only you or the CEO can terminate her, and that a formal performance review process must be followed first. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Brandon tried to fire Samantha. On what basis? He claims insubordination and resistance to his process improvements. Another pause. Then Maria's voice came back. And it was cold. Brandon, are you on this call? Yes, Brandon said, his confident tone from earlier completely gone. Did you read Samantha's employment contract before scheduling a termination meeting? No. I didn't realize she had a special contract. Did you discuss performance concerns with her direct manager, Tom Chen? No. I. Did you discuss this with me? No. So you scheduled a termination meeting for an employee you don't manage. O's contract you didn't review without consulting anyone in her management chain or the HR department in advance. I have authority over sales operations. Samantha doesn't report to sales operations. She reports to Tom, who reports to me. You have no authority over her position. Who told you otherwise? Nobody. I assumed that as director of operations I had authority over personnel decisions impacting the sales organization. You assumed incorrectly. Jennifer, what's the status of this meeting? Samantha invoked her contract protections and demanded that her management chain be involved before any proceedings continue. Good. 1E. Here's what's going to happen. Brandon, you're suspended pending investigation. You'll leave the building immediately. Jennifer, document everything about this meeting. Samantha, I'm flying back first thing tomorrow morning. You and I will meet to discuss this situation and ensure your contract protections are being honored. Everyone clear? There was silence around the table. I said, everyone clear? A chorus of yes from everyone except Brandon, who looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Brandon, did you hear me? You're suspended. Leave the building. You can't suspend me for trying to manage a performance issue. I'm suspending you for attempting to terminate an employee in violation of company policy and her employment contract, for not following chain of command, for conducting personnel actions without authorization. Should I continue? Brandon stood up, his face red, and walked out without another word. After he left, Jennifer looked at me. Samantha, I'm sorry. This should never have happened. We should have caught this when Brandon scheduled the meeting. How did he schedule it without anyone in HR questioning why he was terminating someone who doesn't report to him? She looked uncomfortable. He told my assistant it was a performance counseling session, not a termination. We didn't realize what he was actually planning until the meeting started. But you all stayed once you realized what was happening. We didn't know what to do. This was unprecedented. Here's what you do when someone without authority tries to fire someone with contract protections. You stop the meeting immediately. You don't sit there and let it continue while checking laptops to confirm what you should have verified before the meeting started. One of the other HR team members, David, spoke up. You're right. We should have stopped it the moment Brandon said he was terminating you. We failed to protect you, and that's on us. I appreciated David's honesty. I want documentation of this meeting. Every detail. Who was present, what was said, what Brandon claimed as justification. Because if this doesn't get resolved appropriately, my attorney is going to want that documentation. You'll have it, Jennifer said. Today. I stood up. I'm going to finish my workday. I'll be at my desk if anyone needs me. Tomorrow I'll meet with Maria to discuss next steps. As I walked out of that conference room, I could feel the adrenaline starting to wear off. My hands were shaking slightly. I'd just confronted a director in front of the entire HR team, invoked contract protections I'd never had to use before, and essentially threatened legal action if things weren't handled properly. It was terrifying, but it was also necessary. I went back to my desk and sent an email to my attorney, a lawyer I had kept on retainer specifically for employment issues. Need to discuss potential wrongful termination attempts. Can you call me this evening? He called at 6:30 p.m. I walked him through what happened. He listened without interrupting, then said, Samantha, this is one of the clearest cases of wrongful termination attempt I've heard. The fact that he did it in front of HR is actually helpful. You have witnesses. The fact that your contract explicitly prohibits exactly what he tried to do makes this simple. And the fact that he retaliated against you for questioning his authority gives you additional claims if you want to pursue them. I don't want to sue the company. I want to keep working here. Then your leverage is that they don't want you to sue them. Make sure tomorrow's meeting with Maria results in appropriate accountability for Brandon and protection for you going forward. The next morning, Maria Santos flew back from New York and met with me at 9 a.m. in her office. Samantha, first, I owe you an apology. Brandon's actions were completely inappropriate and violated your contract in multiple ways. That should never have happened. Thank you. Second, I want to understand what led to this. You and Brandon have been clashing since he arrived. Walk me through what's been happening. Now, me. For the next 30 minutes, I detailed every interaction. The new reporting requirements that added work without value. The meetings where Brandon dismissed enterprise sales expertise because it didn't align with his MBA textbook understanding of sales management. The times I'd raised professional concerns and been accused of insubordination. Maria took notes, asked clarifying questions, and at the end said, You raised legitimate concerns about processes that don't fit enterprise sales. Brandon interpreted that as personal resistance to his authority. Yes. And instead of addressing the concerns, he decided to eliminate the person raising them. That's how it looks to me. Maria was quiet for a moment. Here's where we are. Brandon's suspension is pending a full investigation. But based on what happened yesterday and what you're telling me now, I don't see him coming back to this role. What he did was fireable. The question is whether we terminate him or allow him to resign. That's above my pay grade. Fair? But you're the person he wronged, so your input matters. If we fire him, it's public and sends a message. If we let him resign, it's cleaner but less accountability. I thought about it. I don't need him publicly humiliated. But I need to know the company takes this seriously. If he stays in any capacity or this gets swept under the rug as a misunderstanding, then I have a problem. He's not staying. That's not negotiable. Whether he leaves as a termination or resignation is a detail we're working out with legal. But he's done here. Then I'm satisfied. There's something else. Your contract comes up for renewal in 8 months. I want to start those conversations now, and I want to make sure you're compensated appropriately for the revenue you manage and the expertise you bring. You're offering me a new contract? I'm saying that someone who manages $40 million in annual recurring revenue and has the loyalty of our largest clients should be treated as invaluable. Brandon tried to fire you because he didn't understand your value. I don't want you wondering if the company understands your value. 3 days after the attempted termination meeting, Brandon Mitchell resigned. The internal announcement said he was pursuing other opportunities. Everyone who'd heard about the conference room incident knew what that meant. A week after that, I got an email from David in HR. Samantha, I wanted to follow up on something. After your meeting with Brandon, we reviewed all of his personnel recommendations over the past 6 weeks. He'd been suggesting terminations or demotions for 4 other people who'd questioned his processes. All of them people with significant tenure and expertise. You weren't his only target. You were just the one with contract protections and the courage to invoke them. That was sobering. How many people had Brandon quietly pushed out or planned to push out before? Someone stopped him? 2 weeks after the incident, Maria announced organizational changes. Effective immediately, sales operations will be reorganized to focus on technology and infrastructure, not personnel management. All personnel decisions for sales roles will flow through the sales management chain, not through operations. Translation: we're making sure no future Brandon can try this again. 6 weeks after the incident, I started contract renewal negotiations. The company offered me a 3-year deal with increased salary, expanded severance protections, and a clause specifically prohibiting retaliation for raising professional concerns. I signed it. 3 months after the incident, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know. Hi Samantha, my name is Alexis Chen. I work at a company where Brandon Mitchell just started as director of sales. I heard through mutual connections about what happened at Titanium Solutions. Would you be willing to have a confidential conversation about his management style? I called her. Alexis, I'll be direct. Brandon Mitchell tried to fire me in front of our entire HR team without reviewing my employment contract or consulting my management chain. He'd been targeting several other senior employees for raising concerns about his processes. He was asked to resign. That's consistent with what I've been seeing in his first 3 weeks here. He's already trying to push out experienced people and replace them with junior staff he can control. Document everything. Make sure your HR team knows his history. And if he tries to fire anyone, verify he has actual authority to do it. He didn't check at our company, and it ended his employment. Thank you. This is helpful. I wondered how many other companies Brandon would cycle through before he learned that management isn't about authority. It's about earning respect. 6 months after the incident, I was presenting at a sales leadership conference. During Q&A, someone asked about dealing with management conflicts. I had a director try to fire me because I questioned his processes, I said. He scheduled a termination meeting in front of the entire HR team without reviewing my employment contract or consulting my management chain. He had no authority to fire me, but he assumed he did because he was a director and I was a strategist. What happened? I invoked my contract protections. Right there, in the meeting. In front of everyone he'd invited to witness my termination. Turned out I could only be fired by the VP of Sales or CEO, and any wrongful termination attempt triggered liquidated damages. He was suspended immediately and resigned within 3 days. How did you have the courage to do that in the moment? 2 things. First, I knew my contract. I'd negotiated those protections years earlier when I had leverage, and I'd reviewed them periodically to stay familiar with the terms. So when the moment came, I knew exactly what I was protected against. Second, I knew my value. I managed $40 million in annual, recurring revenue. The company couldn't afford to lose me over a director's ego. Once I understood what was happening, I made sure everyone in that room understood my value and my protections. What would you have done if you didn't have contract protections? I would have documented everything, consulted an attorney immediately, and probably filed wrongful termination claims. The retaliation for raising professional concerns alone would have been actionable. But having the contract made it cleaner. I could stop the termination attempt in the moment rather than fighting it after the fact. After the presentation, a young woman approached me. Ms. Reeves, I'm 3 years into my career in enterprise sales. I brought in our company's largest account last year. Based on what you said, should I be negotiating contract protections? Here's my advice. If you've demonstrated clear, measurable value to your company, major accounts, significant revenue, expertise that's hard to replace, then yes, you should negotiate protections when you have leverage. Wait until you've just closed a major deal, or you're being promoted, or you're considering a competing offer. That's when you have negotiating power. Use it to get protections that might save you later. What specific terms should I ask for? At minimum, clear specification of who can terminate you, formal performance review process before termination, meaningful severance, and liquida. TED damages for wrongful termination. Those 4 terms create significant protection. Norin. Won't companies refuse to offer contracts like that? Companies that value retention and understand the cost of replacing top performers will negotiate. Companies that see everyone as replaceable won't. If a company refuses to offer protection to someone who's proven their value, that tells you something about whether you want to work there. A year after Brandon tried to fire me, Titanium Solutions closed the largest deal in company histo. Ryan Rye. $87, 3-year contract, with a global logistics company. I wasn't the lead on that deal, but I'd been part of the team that developed the strategy and client relationship over 18 months. At the company celebration, our CEO mentioned me by name. Samantha's expertise in enterprise relationship management was what? Critical to this deal. Her ability to understand complex client needs and translate them into solutions is exactly what makes Titanium successful. Maria pulled me aside afterward. You know what the best part of closing that deal is? The revenue? The fact that you're still here to be part of it. A year ago, a director who'd been here 6 weeks tried to fire you because you questioned his processes. If you hadn't known your contract and stood up for yourself, we might have lost you. And losing you might have meant losing deals like this. Brandon made a mistake. Brandon made a lot of mistakes. But the biggest one was thinking job titles matter more than results. You deliver results. That's what matters. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want you to understand something. This isn't about contract negotiations or legal technicalities. It's about knowing your value, protecting yourself when you have leverage, and being willing to stand up when someone tries to diminish you. Brandon Mitchell tried to fire me in front of the entire HR team. He did it because he had a fancy title and assumed that gave him authority over everyone. He didn't check my contract. He didn't consult my management chain. He didn't verify he had the power he thought he had. His mistake taught me something important. Protections only matter if you're willing to invoke them. I could have walked out of that conference room, called an attorney, and fought the termination after the fact. Instead, I stopped it in the moment by knowing my contract and demanding accountability immediately. That made all the difference. If you've ever been threatened with termination, if you've ever been told you're replaceable when you know you're not, if you've ever negotiated protections you hoped you'd never need, remember this. Know your value. Document your contribute. Ions negotiate protections when you have leverage, and don't be afraid to invoke those protections when necessary. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your experiences in the comments about times you've had to stand up to authority or times you've negotiated protections that saved you. Those stories help others find courage. Remember, a junior director tried to fire me in front of HR wall. He didn't check my contract. They did. And he learned very quickly that authority without actual power is just a title on a business card.